Hello and welcome to Planet Critical, a podcast for a world in crisis. My name is Rachel Donald. I'm an investigative journalist and your host. Every week I interview experts who are battling to save our planet. My guests are economists, scientists, politicians, academics, and activists. They explain the complexity of the energy, economic, and ecological crises that we face today, and they reveal their solutions to mitigate the damage to our future. This is a critical time for our planet. It demands critical thinking. Click the subscribe button now and go to planetcritical.com to learn more. This week's guest is Eric Asadourian. Eric is a die-hard environmental activist who worked at the World Watch Institute for years, becoming a senior research fellow into everything sustainable. And Eric joined me to discuss Gaianism. Gaianism is a spiritual movement, let's say, that Eric is driving around the world because he believes that faith could be a solution to the climate crisis and the social crisis and all of the other crises that we face. He says that we don't have a relationship with the natural world, we don't have a relationship with communities, and therefore there needs to be some kind of spiritual framework with which to engender and nurture a new relationship to living. Now, I'm all for faith as a necessary and beautiful part of life. I'm extremely skeptical of organized religion, and this seems to fall somewhere in between. And Eric's brilliant for everything that I wanted to push him on. He was extremely conscientious, extremely thoughtful, and did his best to answer my questions, and has since gone away and thought about these questions as well. He wrote a really interesting blog recently based on one of the questions I asked him that, is this not just sort of vegan Bali influencer culture that's only available for privileged white people? And that's also actually the topic of the bonus episode that is out this week on this interview. For anyone that's not aware, I'm currently releasing, it's just been the past few weeks, bonus episodes on patreon.com. So you can go and find my, a little snippet of my thoughts and analysis on each interview over there. Anyway, there's a lot to learn in this episode. There's a lot to think about it, and I really hope you enjoy it. If you do, please share it far and wide. If you love it, though, do consider supporting Planet Critical on Patreon. The Patreon link is in the description box below, and thanks to everyone who is already supporting the project. I am so excited to speak to you.
Oh, thank you.
So excited. Having a form of religion or spirituality or myth to kind of lead humanity into the future has been something my friend and I, James Cusson, have been discussing for years and years and years and years and years. And then when you were platformed, and I went on and I started reading about Gaianism. I was like, oh my God, could this be it? Like, is this the thing that we've been thinking about? And yeah, I'm just thrilled to have you on the show. Thank you for making time for me.
Well, of course, it was, when I was looking through your website, I was impressed with how many, great thinkers you've been interviewing. And, some of them I've been lucky to connect with, or they've written for World Watch over the years. So I've gotten to know them. And then there were some that I hadn't heard of, like this Russian forestry expert. I keep quoting her in some of the essays. I'm not sure if you've seen that, but it was really such a wonderful conversation.
I'm humbled every week, every time I get to speak to all of you fantastic people and the incredible research or the daring conversations that people are engaging in. I'm just a wee aggregate, and I'm really thrilled to be so.
Don't ever knock being an aggregator, right? I mean, that's where I come from. Right. I was a synthesizer, essentially. I'm not a thinker as much as a synthesizer. Right? That was World Watch's kind of brand. That was their mode. They would take all the kind of deep data in the sustainability community, marry that with stories and journal articles and on the ground reports, and weave that together in a more kind of engaging way of talking about the sustainability crisis and the solutions. So that's really, I think there is that's a really important niche that is undervalued in our culture, I think.
So tell us a little bit more about World Watch then, and what it means to be a synthesizer then, and why you were attracted to do that kind of work.
Attracted makes it sound like I was much more conscious about my flow of life. I was actually a psychology and religion major in college. And that brought me to do some moral development and psychology research in India, which revealed for the first time the sustainability crisis in full form, rather than in our invisible form in the United States, where garbage magically disappears and the effects of consumerism is pretty well hidden. And that shifted my studies completely to sustainability, which wasn't even a word I knew in college. And then became an environmental organizer and felt like I didn't know what I was organizing for because I didn't really have knowledge and background. So joined WorldWatch as a lowly research intern back in 2001, a month before 9/11, actually, which shifted even the sustainability landscape. But then really found a home there because I was given a lot of freedom when I suggested different frames of how to tackle sustainability. Nobody questioned it. I mean, there was pushback, but when I wanted to write about consumerism as a cultural pattern and how we need to shift that in order to really address the sustainability crisis, I was able to, and that became State of the World 2010, and really the foundation of a lot of my work, where that brought me to talk about economic degrowth. It led to trying to create a reality TV show to get millennial Americans to move back in with their parents to yard farm and step out of the consumer economy, and on and on. So it was it ended up being a home that gave me a lot of freedom to look deeply at how to really tackle the sustainability crisis.
Sounds like a modern philosophical journal, really. Because I think when we think about philosophy, I say we, when I think about philosophy and I think of like the peaks of philosophy throughout history, it's always been when also the economy and civilization is going through a massive upsurge as well. And there's freedom that's given by having access to such resources. Think of the Greeks, you think of, the French postmodernists after the World War II, the boom. And philosophy today, coming from a philosophy background at university, it doesn't really seem to be tackling any of the real world issues, as if it's kind of gotten itself stuck in this, what's the correct phrase? Like metaphysical niche, rather than, being aware of the physical issues that there are. So it sounds like what you were doing at WorldWatch was kind of providing a philosophy to live by, or at least one that was trying to access the general public and make things accessible to the general public.
To some extent, it's a good. I mean, I'm flattered that you would suggest that. Although I think it was, we were constrained with the mode or the culture of the organization, which was very much we need facts, we need stories, we need to make it engaging. So I remember actually, as an editor of several State of the Worlds, of ripping apart, philosophical articles because they just wouldn't fit into our model, and I would, I wasn't really free to. I mean, the worst story of that was when Sergei Latouche, the father of degrowth, offered to write a chapter, and it was so philosophical that it ended up getting reduced into a box, which I'm embarrassed about now. But I mean, it just wouldn't fit into our forum. So I think we did do that, although I think there are other philosophers. Peter Singer, for example, comes to mind, who's really grappled with, eating meat and charity and that kind of thing. We could find a better way within the sustainability community to enable more deep philosophy. And that's a bit of where this work in Gaianism came from too. I mean, Arne Naess in the 1970s was trying to create a deep ecology, a philosophy that would really grapple with our real relationship with the earth, rather than this shallow environmentalism of saving place X or fighting power plant Y. And so that, I think, for me, did start to kind of take root in my own thinking, which I think really it was only after WorldWatch that I was free to write fully like an eco-philosopher.
Is that how you would identify now, as an eco-philosopher?
That's too, I don't think I could say that with a straight face, right? I mean, that sounds very arrogant. Although, I mean, if you look at the definition of philosophy and all that, everybody can be a philosopher, but I'm certainly not credentialed. So there's, I guess, a little bit of a resistance internally to say I'm an eco-philosopher. But I mean, I guess if experience makes you something, then sure, I would be an eco-philosopher. A sustainability thinker is what kind of naturally fits when I'm explaining it, but that's just as arrogant, I guess, now that I say it out loud. So what's the difference? I'm just trying to grapple like everybody else is with this moment of crisis that we are in. I mean, we're in a state of ecological collapse driven by our culture of consumerism multiplied by our huge population and our technologies and our growth obsession and all those other things. And those are leading to some really scary times ahead. And this is the latest attempt to make sense of it all and offer something healthy to kind of navigate it.
Right. So let's get into it then. And I can rephrase the question. What is your eco-philosophy? What is Gaianism?
So if I had to kind of summarize it at the very simplest, just a simple recognition that we are part of the earth and utterly dependent on it. I mean, that's as simple as it gets, right? I mean, there can be layers and layers upon that. But I mean, if you go back to the roots of, there's two major influences on it. And that's what I mentioned already, Arne Naess and deep ecology. Just understanding that we have an opportunity to create a deeper relationship with the planet, and that can stem from all different ways. Being engaged with nature, connecting with nature as a child, and all that. But then the other piece that I don't think Naess had at that time was Lovelock's work on the Gaia theory, and just recognizing that the Earth is a living system, right? And that doesn't need to get mystical. I mean, I think lots of people go there. I don't as much. This is a very scientifically rooted philosophy / faith, if that makes sense. Just like early, Christianity and Islam were too, before it kind of went off in a different direction. They were major drivers of scientific revolution, and that so that faith and science, while typically directly at odds today, doesn't have to be that way. So what I'm saying is, I mean, Gaia theory is really this understanding that the Earth is a living system. And once we recognize that, and once we recognize we're part of that, and even more importantly, we're completely dependent on it, then it changes pretty much everything, right? I mean, we can't keep consuming and producing emissions and living like we're living with any doubt that we're not leading to our own demise. And so it opens up this deeper conversation of, okay, how do we live today in a state of collapse and overshoot? And what's the opportunity to shift that relationship?
Why do you think developing a philosophy or a faith will provide people with a different framework when, science is saying, hey, you can't have infinite resources on a finite planet? I think instinctually on some level as well, there's an awareness of like the complete cognitive dissonance of being disconnected from the reality of our situation. Like, what is it about stories or philosophy that you think grabs kind of the human attention so much, and why do you think it could lead us out of this crisis?
That's two questions. The second one, let me tackle that first, because I don't think we're coming out of this crisis. So the first issue is with sustainability right now, is that we think we've confused it with the renewable green economy kind of nonsense. We're not going to grow our way in a green way out of this crisis. If we truly are going to shift and save ourselves, meaning prevent massive suffering and a huge die-off, that means a massive stage of degrowth, which truthfully, I don't see any scenario where we actively choose that. It's sad to say that, because that was most of my career, was trying to advocate for that. But it's just very hard to see that coming through.
Just sorry to interrupt, but quickly, maybe for somebody that hasn't doesn't know much about this, could you summarize degrowth very briefly, what that would look like?
Briefly, well, I mean, degrowth just means that, right? We intentionally stop growing our economies, especially in overdeveloped countries like the United States. That doesn't mean in the lowest developed countries, which are suffering from poverty. There is space there if countries like the U.S. and Europe and all that choose to reduce growth, and that's scary because here we are always talking about inflation and recession and all that, but it doesn't mean that you can't have a really good quality of life. In fact, I mean, in State of the World 2013, we had a chapter on Cuba, which was controversial. But I mean, if you really look at it, the Cubans, ignoring all the dictatorial stuff, I mean, they live at a almost an equal level of quality of life in many ways as the U.S. Lower infant mortality rates, lower maternal mortality rates, better health, better education. They just don't have stuff. So really a degrowth model that is real would be a exchange of lots more public goods, healthcare, public transit, walkable communities, public libraries, in exchange for all the privatized stuff that we have. And it obviously will take a huge getting used to. But if we don't choose it, then the alternative is not business as usual. The alternative is collapse, right? So then we'll not have those privatized goods either, but we also won't have the resources to develop public goods at that point. So we'll just live in a really worse state, which will also feed into all the political unrest and the fundamentalism and all the other stuff that's a natural outgrowth of angry people. So degrowth is a key piece. But now I've lost the original question in the process of that.
I think it was why are people attracted to why develop a philosophy to get people out of this, and why do you think people are attracted to stories to lead them out of the crisis?
Right. Thank you. Yeah, instead of science. And I was just reading a few days ago an interview in the New York Times with Katharine Hayhoe, who's a evangelical climate scientist, and actually would make a good guest if you have not thought of her. But she, she grapples with that all the time, but makes it very clear. I mean, we are an emotional species, right? I don't think we're mostly rational. So there, just for that reason alone, storytelling and a non-cognitive based way of grappling with things is really important. Although that's not why I, started cultivating this. It was really for multiple reasons. One, if one of the last pieces I wrote for World Watch was this understanding of just looking at the failures of environmentalism to be successful, and looking at other philosophies throughout time and social movements, and really the most effective ones are missionary religions, right? Those philosophies that are actively reaching out to others, providing community, providing assistance in times of need, and all of that. And this was the kind of the founding point of Gaianism, with recognizing that we need a deeper way of organizing environmentalism. But then after that, these practices and the community started to develop around these ideas, right? So meditation, especially outdoor meditation, forest meditation, nature meditation, became a really fundamental piece of Gaianism, right? So I started meditating as part of this, and now the goal every day is to meditate at morning, noon, and the evening, not for long, but just outside and re-ground myself. And the more I've read about meditation, it's not something you have to believe in. One kind of neuroscientist said it's something you practice, right? Yeah. So it doesn't have to be mystical or magical, and Buddhism certainly doesn't have a monopoly on it, even though they have been the beautiful leaders of kind of learning it and figuring it out. But especially in this time of crisis where things are changing so rapidly, having that mental grounding ability that meditation offers and provides is essential, and is only going to get more essential as more fires happen and more floods happen, and governments fail and can't provide the assistance that we expect from them. So over time, there are other ways, non-cognitive, to start preparing oneself, right? So there's meditation. Fasting is actually has become a piece of this. Following the moons, actually. So new moon and full moon, we have a fast, and the idea behind that is twofold. One, I mean, living in a consumer society, we typically eat too much. We're surrounded by too many opportunities to consume, and fasting is a good opportunity to kind of step back from that cycle. But so few of us, between the distraction with entertainment, between the light pollution, so few of us look up any longer and don't see the moon. I don't know, didn't know what cycle of the moon it was anymore until I started this fast, and now I'm actually more attuned to the Earth cycles again. Same with the meditation and all of that. So there's opportunities, non-intellectualizing, to just connect to the Earth on a regular day-to-day cycle, on the kind of monthly cycle, on the annual cycle, following the solstices and the equinoxes and that kind of thing. So that's, I think, a little bit of a kind of a taste.
Let's get into a little bit, because a lot of that sounds very vegan Bali Instagram influencer culture as well.
Yeah. Yuck. Okay. I guess you're right, but I hope not.
I mean, I think that there is, I ascribe to Jung's theory of the collective subconscious, unconscious, one of them, and think that we do see these sort of waves in populations of people as they try to achieve or reach for something that they intuitively on some level know that they need. However, I think that how that culture of like that desire to reconnect with the Earth, because we've become so disconnected, and how that's manifested now as vegan Bali Instagram influencer culture, and also the role of religion in arriving to where we are today. Like, I think we should discuss that as well when you're proposing that it could be a faith-based, not solution, because there is no one solution, but a faith-based weapon or arm to steer through, the current crisis and the upcoming inevitable crises. So, I mean, how is it that, like, with that in mind, the lens in mind of the fact that it was a monotheistic and heaven-based, otherworldly-based religions that kind of rose man up to this idolized state, withdrew any natural connections from the Earth, completely abandoned any form of paganism, and saw it as this animalistic culture. With that in mind, what could be the problems of a faith-based solution?
Well, I think I want to flip that, because there's opportunities, is what you're describing. So this is not God-centric. This is Earth-centric, right? It's reconnecting to the Earth. When I describe what you're right, as I describe those different practices, it could certainly sound trendy or fatty, but it's not, in the sense that, I mean, meditation is trendy now, but it's been trendy for 2,500 years.
Sure. Yeah,
right? Yeah. And so, and veganism is actually not part of this, because when systems break down and refrigerators are no longer available, we will be eating meat again, because livestock are refrigerators, right? I mean, it's a cruel way of saying it. I don't mean it that way. They're beautiful living animals, and we need to give gratitude when we kill an animal for their meat, but or their hide or whatever. But we also have to recognize that we are part of a living life cycle, right? And so when we decide not to use animal products and instead use polyester fleece, and that fleece is washing away bit by bit into the ocean every time we wash it and killing fish, that's a total disconnect. So we need to first and foremost recognize ourselves as part of a living system and stop using materials that are killing the Earth, and instead reintegrate ourselves into that Earth system. But I think having a philosophy that understands that intuitively and inherently, and more importantly, has a community that reinforces that. A lot of our community practices are pedagogical, right? We have a monthly book club and talking about different aspects of the living earth or of environmentalism or what have you. We have a monthly conversation that talks more about the specifics about the Gaian way. So there's opportunities, but most importantly, which hasn't come up yet, and I'll just share it, is that all religions have to be grounded locally, right? If you don't have some sort of local community, when the internet fails, along with everything else, this will go poof, right? So, one of the big practices that we're trying to cultivate are these local Gaian guilds, right? Where you come together for a weekly forest meditation. You ideally support each other in times of need and celebration. There's opportunities to to be intentionally provocative, indoctrinate children, right? As all religions do. I mean, we've had our first, set of kids at one of our local Gaian guild forest meditations this last month, where we had 5 kids, and they went into the forest to play, right? Which is how I see Sunday school in the ideal form, not teaching old saints and that kind of thing, but actually connecting to the earth. So there's opportunities to reconnect people in real ways to a living earth, and then get them understanding their dependence on it. Yes, if the opposite is what we're talking about, connecting to God, telling people that it's okay that creation dies because we'll go off to heaven. I agree, that's really dangerous. And so, I mean, the afterlife in Gaianism is very simple. We return to the earth and make new life, sure, but without consciousness. There's no reincarnation, there's no afterlife, but we are always part of the earth. Right now, we are in our brief conscious stage, and then we go back into the elements, and, we'll be new life in another way, but not in any conscious way. But this is our moment to thrive and to do something good for the earth. To heal it, to protect it, to celebrate our connection to it, and that's not even the right word. It's not an it. It's Gaia. It's all living being. So I don't know if that answers your question. It's a tough question you're asking, but I mean, I hope that got to it.
Kind of. I would counter it with, it seems to me that religion goes wrong, becomes fundamental, when it becomes a series of practices and one is not taught the moral or the message or the reasoning behind it, That's why Christmas has become, just a crazy consumerist holiday. Same with Eid. It was all meant to be about fasting and not eating much in remembrance of those who have very little, and now it's a feast, the moment the sun goes down. Still there's a counter of like, how do you communicate those messages to everyone? How do you ensure that the right message is being spread constantly? Because, I mean, I think my own personal belief would be, you teach critical thinking, you teach people how to think, and then there has to be that element of autonomy and independence. These things, especially in democratic countries, these things that we've become used to and I think are helpful. To me, it seems that teaching people to think critically, to be able to input information, synthesize, aggregate, come to their own conclusions, would be as beneficial as prescribing them or indoctrinating them into a certain way. And so I wonder, is there also an element of that you think like we've kind of run out of time to do it in that gradual evolutionary manner? Is that why it's important to indoctrinate at this point as well?
I shouldn't have used the word indoctrinate.
I know.
That certainly I meant in the pure way that
introducing.
All children are exposed to certain ideas and they just take it for granted, right? I mean, that's the beauty of culture, right? And that's, again, the work at World Watch was all about recognizing that, borrowing from Dana Meadows and her understandings of the levers of change, the most powerful lever is changing the paradigm, right? So if the paradigm of culture today is consumerism, propped up by $500 billion a year of advertising, PR, lobbying, huge amounts of expenditures, which breaks down this whole idea that critical thinking works, right? Because my critical thinking, after 20 years of sustainability studies, still can't compete with, the advertising, with the lock-in where I am in a car-based society, right? I can't abandon a lot of the practices, and especially once family is involved, right? Where if I want to sustain my relationship with my wife, I have to turn on the heat in the winter, right? Even though it's natural gas based, right? So, that'll change when collapse happens and there is no natural gas. But right now, since it's available, domestic tranquility demands. So I mean, critical thinking can only go so far, and I've advocated it for forever. I mean, the State of the World 2017 was all about what education should look like for this changing planet, right? How do we make children into sustainability leaders and resilience leaders so that they can help their communities to survive as systems break down? And of course, there's a chapter on critical thinking and systems thinking, moral education, and on and on. But I don't think there's anything in Gaian practices that conflict with critical thinking, right? I mean, to be fair, this is a very small community right now. It's people who have discovered the Gaian website, that have kind of always self-identified as Gaians, some friends from World Watch, and others that have kind of come to this. And everybody has it's a smorgasbord of views already, right? I mean, there's no kind of deep, okay, this is what this is, and if you don't accept this, you have to go away. It's not cult-like or anything like that. If anything, it's the other extreme where it's too open and people come and kind of share their ideas, and which hinders the growth in the sense that it's we're not prescribing and demanding enough. Perhaps that would be my self-criticism. But I think the point is it's trying to start a conversation. I certainly do not think that I've been told on high, or Gaia down low has told me what this is. If anything, I'm just sharing the common sense of what has come from philosophers in the past, and just recognizing that if we don't make changes, this is what's coming. Having a community who understands this will help you to get through it. In the longer term, the hope is, this is my big dream, is that the collapse is not the end, unless we really, really collapse and humans go extinct. Most likely, it won't be that extreme, and we'll shrink down our population. And the worst case scenario is that we then regrow, reconquer, redominate in new ways. Like a bad science fiction story, right? I think of Canticle of Leibowitz all the time, because after the nuclear holocaust there, it took 1,000 years, but then another civilization came and made another nuclear bomb and blew up themselves up again, right? And I could see our tendency of doing that because of the dominant cultural paradigms right now, the dominant faiths, all that. But if we could recognize and cultivate a regenerative relationship with the earth now, sow the seeds now, so that as things fall apart, we don't turn, we meaning not everyone, turns to fundamentalist beliefs, but instead turns to a recognition that, whoops, we did this to ourselves. The earth, is welcoming, but is also, doesn't take shit, if I can say it that way. And if we don't kind of return to the fold, we're just going to keep doing this to ourselves. I think it'll be easy to demonize the earth as things are falling apart. And that's going to open up the opportunity for some to profit on geoengineering, on creating seawalls and all this other hard technology that's going to hurt the earth and ourselves in the long term even more. So if we can shift that conversation away from that and recognizing we're part of the earth, and we need to start focusing on regenerative pathways, that will be a lot better in the long term.
You see that kind of language at the moment more and more, don't we? That the earth is angry, or she's getting her own back, or she's sick of us. She's trying to get rid of us. And it's such an interesting thing to witness, because there's at once a recognition of a part of the reality, which is that we are having an impact, we are messing with living systems, and also a huge anthropomorphism and simplification of the actual issue, which is, again, it's still us. It's not that she's angry and she's trying to get rid of us. It's that the Earth systems are responding to how we're meddling with them. Exactly. And we just need to stop meddling with them. We're not victim of our own. I mean, we are victim of our own consequences, because arguably, there's billions of people in the world that are living sustainably and who will be the first victims of climate change, if not already are. Right. But there's a huge number of the rest of us that, we're just witnessing the consequences of our own actions.
Yeah, and but we don't. But nobody's telling us that, right? I mean, you know that, and I know that. But most people can't even experience the consequences of their own actions of not wearing masks and not getting vaccinated, right? Because there's emotional barriers, and there's a community of people saying otherwise to them, right? So, that's again where a community of practice comes in, and this kind of sharing of a different reality is valuable. And that used to be the church's role, and even that, going back to that interview I mentioned. I mean, when you only have an hour of church a week, that can't compete with the 20 hours that you spend on Facebook, and the 10 hours of news and whatever. So the dominant drivers of our realities are the media and our social networks, and that's teaching us something very different than what you just described.
That's an interesting point. I mean, is it teaching us anything? No, it's true. I mean, it's like if you look at how and what we know about algorithms, this is fact, and things have been leaked about algorithms. I mean, it's not some big mastermind conspiracy to stupefy a population. It's simply that it notices that if something's a little bit more extreme than the last thing, but it's on a certain line, there's a curve, like you'll click on it, So I don't think media isn't teaching us anything. Media is a reflection of the things that we already know, the things that we're interested in. Like, to me, I take huge, what's the word? Gumption. It annoys me when people talk about the media, capital T, capital M, because I'm a journalist. It's like, what is the media? What is it? It's just us. It's all us. In the same way that, populations get, many populations in democratic countries, not in non-democratic countries, we get the leaders that we deserve. They're a reflection of the culture at the time. They're a reflection of the zeitgeist.
It's an interesting, so I get what you're saying, and I'd like to agree with you. But how about, can I put the corporate media? I'm not one who's but I'm not advocating for conspiracy, right? But when, in the back rooms of I hate to pick on Fox News, but that's the one that's always big. Like, there is a recognition that certain voices attract certain people to keep coming. And then that kind of perpetuates that reverberation of a certain worldview. There was a great Yale researcher who kind of made the wonderful point about why people don't believe in climate change, and it's community-based at one level, right? So if I go to a church where everybody doesn't believe in climate change, and I say, hey guys, this is, of course it's real, and then they ostracize me, and I have no community anymore because they think I'm a liberal, crazy guy, or has been polluted or whatever, then my community goes. And so I've lost something tangible in the real and in the current because of it. Instead of, focusing on the risk, who cares about a risk 100 years from now, or 20 years from now, or 10 years if I'm suddenly isolated from my own community that gives me meaning. So, I wouldn't say any of it. I'm not trying to communicate that it's some sort of conspiracy, although the $500 billion of advertising a year is not conspiratorial, but the goal is to sell stuff, right? Stuff that is mostly destroying the planet and is unnecessary at one level or another. even though we fully believe it is necessary at this point. We've kind of become entitled to it and need it. And then that perpetuates lots of other, kind of side effects, right? The lobbying, the money based political system that, we don't want these politicians necessarily, but they're the ones who are really good with getting money from corporations, from donors, whatever. So there is a whole deeper systemic um, inertia or momentum that has locked us into this path, and I'm not really sure anymore how to get out.
I think the word that you used there, which is so key, is entitlement and inertia. Because if you look at other parts of the world that are undemocratic, are living with huge poverty, huge visible corruption as well, the way that they have to organize, it's life or death every day. They're organizing for their political freedoms. And they get on with it. There's a huge part of the population that gets on with it. There's a huge part of the population that is so precarious they can't think about that. And then you look at, like, certainly UK, Europe, USA, the amount of information that we have at our fingertips, the amount of capital that we have at our fingertips, especially in, like, in the environmental movement or in media or in academia or whatever, we have every opportunity to actually get on with it. But we've become so entitled, and so numbed in many ways, to our own privilege that, like, I don't know, we seem to think that we are not causing the things around us when we are. It's us, I think, and this is, to do with my work, like, there are huge geopolitical things happening which are to do with very, very scary people that have very, very scary friends and are making very, very bad decisions that are going to impact all of us. But when it comes to, like, culture, consumer culture, or materialism or capitalism, like, it's us. It's not some big bad guy in a room somewhere. We are doing it to ourselves.
Yes, but what's interesting is this: over the summer, I edited a 1.5 degree lifestyles report,
Okay, cool.
by the Hot or Cool Institute, and actually the head of that institute, Louis Akenji, would be another good guest if you're looking for them. But the findings are so overwhelming in that, right? So if we actually wanted to stabilize emissions, how much of our lifestyles would have to change? And in the 10 countries they surveyed, US wasn't one of them because it's just such an outlier. It didn't, it wouldn't even fit into their calculations.
Yeah.
But even, Canada, which was their biggest consumer, the extreme changes, right? No more, pretty much, even if everybody all went vegan and stopped driving and cut their home sizes in half, they would still not get to the mark, right? And so when that's the extreme shift that's necessary, it's so easy for people to just turn it off, right? I mean, it's just overwhelming. So I get why people, are saying, let's get more renewables, woohoo, because that sounds like a solution and it gets them off the hook. Even though that building all those renewables would completely devastate huge lands and burn even more fossil fuels in the creation of them.
Yeah.
So some of it is really recognizing the limits, right? So that's, again, recognizing we're part of the earth and recognizing the limits to growth, the limits of the earth. That changes what is expected of us. Smaller family sizes, sacrificing. That's it's not a dirty word, right? But sacrificing, meaning, consuming less, traveling less, living a more local lifestyle. John Michael Greer has such a great quote of, collapse now and avoid the rush, right? So trying to kind of localize your lifestyle and kind of get over the consumer, cultural pressure to go explore the world and go, get this new thing and all of that. It's hard though. Nobody's immune to that. Even even those who kind of eat sustainability for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, they're still, following the same consumer ways that most people are.
And I think, what is it that drives this? Because it's not just consumerism. It's not just capitalism. There have been millennia of civilizations that have come up and kind of outdone themselves essentially and collapsed. What's in us? What do you think? Because I would assume that this is why as well you're trying to create this faith-based, community-based solution. What has driven us in this way? Because at the same token, there's other populations in the world who often get kind of grouped under the term indigenous peoples, who do live in balance with the earth and who are completely everything that we're talking about that, seems to have taken ages to understand and wrap our heads around, just common sense to them.
Common sense figured out over tens of thousands of years. Perhaps bringing this to an indigenous perspective, it was more life or death, right? They didn't have long supply chains. This is oversimplifying, but right now it's easy to not worry about the little bit of oil that's leaking out of my car. Not that it is, but just hypothetical example. That's pouring down the driveway and into the water here, because that water goes off and pollutes somewhere else, right? I am guilty of this, or the microfibers that come off of the fleece that I own, secondhand even, but it doesn't matter. That's going into the water and killing something, right? We're in that globalized world that we don't see the ramifications of all the damage that we do. If we, I know in college campuses around the world, they used to have that little, put your garbage in a bag and carry it around for a week, right? Like that's like the classic thing where, and it starts to accumulate pretty quickly, and you can start to see how, consumptive you are. We don't see that. It's all magically whisked away. And when people get obsessed with it, then they often overly focus on that instead of the bigger issues anyway, right? So you hear all those stories of people getting 100% of plastic out of their lives, right? But they've ended up focusing all of their life energy on that instead of lobbying or fighting or other things. So, but I think, in an indigenous situation where, the medicine, the food, everything was dependent directly on the environment around you, it was much easier perhaps to see and understand our dependence on the planet and that we are part of that whole system, right? If we overkill the deer, then there won't be deer next season and we're going to go hungry. If we underkill them, then they're going to get diseases, so that we actually became part of that living system and balance. And if we plant these types of trees and guard the soil underneath it, then they flourish, right? And we can actually deepen the soil and make for better rains in the forest and all that, right? So that was gained slowly, probably over centuries, and we quickly wiped it all away. On this continent, with the spread of a new culture, the colonization, the killing off through disease and through domination of this, of these stewards, and not to romanticize, but I think there was a much deeper understanding and balance that was gained over millennia. That was not part of the European way, right? That was from ancient Roman times and before. There was a empire style kind of pathway, and that has to go, right? We can't sustain empire on a finite planet with 8 billion people almost, going up to 9, maybe 10 before we shrink back down, whether we chose to or not.
So to anybody listening who's concerned about this, which they probably are because they're listening, what can people do? Because you've said, it sounds like you really think, we're heading towards a collapse. I would agree. I think that something's got to give. A lot of things have got to give. The system is going to change. How we deal with that is unfortunately entirely dependent on, public education and public pressure, because the leaders obviously don't want to change how things are. So what can people do, and how can they navigate it?
Well, I mean, there's so many ways, and there are no ways, if that makes sense, right? So if you think too hard about it, and anything that you choose will feel like it's not enough, right? I mean, unless you're fully devoting yourself day in and day out to climate activism or whatever. But even that, I mean, climate change is just one of the breakdowns of the systems. So, I mean, I think for me, it's come to be a more holistic way, right? So, I chose to have one child, for example. That was not an easy choice. It was a much harder choice than the natural gas one. But in the end, my wife came into agreement with that, and for other reasons, and for that. But so that's one small example, right? And if we look at our short lives as a whole, rather than today, it gives a little bit more opportunity to think about all the different ways that we can engage, right? So at the end of my life, I want a green burial, right? I want a burial where I'm wrapped in a shroud and put into the ground, naturally healing Gaia through my little bits of matter, rather than how my father died, which was to be embalmed with toxic chemicals, put into an expensive wooden coffin, put in a plastic vault into a grass-laden field cemetery that is probably sprayed with pesticides even today, right? So even at the last moments of life, we have an opportunity to heal or to poison, right? And you can just say that about every day, right? How do you spend your day? Do you consume, spontaneously and buy something on Amazon? Do you stay away from those consumer opportunities and take a little time to meditate and learn to be in your own self? Do you spend time in activism? In the fall we had a little conversation in the community about kind of different Gaian practices, and one of the Gaians presented, kind of splitting it into four pieces: contemplative, right? So that's the meditation and fasting, that kind of thing. The community building, right? So a lot of this is a lot easier if you have a community to support you. When I, say to my mom why I had one child, she doesn't really get it, right? Because she's not of this, philosophy in a sense. But when I say it to other self-identified Gaians or even environmentalists that World Watch, they say, "Oh yeah, okay, that makes sense," right? And so that validates you enough so that you can stick with your ideas. Then there is active, right? If we just treat this like an internal kind of feelings thing, that's not enough, right? There's a wonderful book by Derek Jensen, a comic book almost. I forget, 10 ways to stay in denial. And there's a guy who's meditating and saying, "Yes, I'm at one with the earth." And then he's sitting on what looks like a chair, but you zoom out and he's actually sitting on a stump, while like foresters are cutting down an entire forest around him, right? So you can't just meditate while the world is collapsing around you. You have to get active and pick a way that feels right to you, whether that's climate activism or, I've advocated a few times, even though it's a rare thing. Joanna Macy has advocated for nuclear guardianship, just kind of recognizing that there are nuclear power plants that will eventually become scars on the landscape. And if in 1,000 years or even 200 years, depending on how things go, they could be really dangerous sites. So having people kind of understand those sites and being almost wisdom keepers, warning people about them. And obviously before that, advocating for, stopping the use of nuclear power, or maybe not nuclear power, but at least, fighting against nuclear warheads, that kind of thing. There's so many different ways to fight, to heal Gaia. and learning is the last one, just to go through all four, right? And just kind of keep learning and understanding and connecting. And learning doesn't necessarily only need to be reading books and that kind of thing, or listening to podcasts, but getting out into Gaia, learning how to forage, learning how to make fire with a bow drill, just the kind of the traditional skills that also bring us much more close to nature and to a living planet.
Can I ask you a difficult question?
I think so.
Is there a certain futility in that practice? Because arguably, the peoples around the world who perhaps have this cultural, intuitive, instinctive relationship to Gaia, because they have been starved of development, a lot of them, or have rejected industrial development. Those practices are not going to save them from rising sea levels. It's not going to save them from the mass deforestation. It's not going to save them from the impending horrific heat waves that are going to make their homes uninhabitable. The environmental movement comes under a lot of flack and has done forever for being super middle class. Is that kind of activism a way of self-soothing rather than attacking the issue? Because when you put it up against the crisis, the economic, energy, climate crisis, I mean, what can it do?
I think there's a couple things to pull out of that. I mean, the activism, there's an infinite need for activism, right? Mm-hmm. And I think, if depending on who's listening, if somebody wants to fully dive in and almost lose themselves in activism, I wouldn't disagree with that. But I also recognize most people aren't that, right? It's like the middle path in Buddhism versus the monk, right? I mean, some people will choose the monk path, and that's wonderful. And I actually wish I could do that, but I don't. Honestly, I don't, I guess, because I have a family and I love my son and I love spending time with my son. And I admit that I'm not that strong, I guess, at some level. But the middle path means you should do some activism, right? And some ways to fight and some focusing on, mental exercises for yourself, right? I mean, meditation is about why I value it so much is twofold. One, it has helped me to turn off from the consumer impulses, right? So it has helped me in being less of a consumer, but it also has helped me to stop the eco anxiety that I think would have come without it, right? Where, I mean, you read about eco anxiety every day now, especially in young people. But once you recognize that, the collapse is not inevitable, but probable, or maybe inevitable. I don't want to be a downer, but the data suggests that it is.
Oh yeah,
but it's the question is, what is in our control is how fast it comes and how out of control and how much we help each other in that transition. But it is coming, and so finding the mental space to kind of accept that, roll with that, recognize that we all return to Gaia, right? I mean, like the wave that's afraid of hitting the beach, but in reality, he's part of the ocean, right? So kind of that kind of perspective shift is very important. As far as learning skills and that kind of thing, it's for itself, right? There's a joy in it. Right? I actually remember learning how to start a fire with a bow drill, and it took a long time to figure it out. And when I actually got my first coal, I cried. I mean, it was ridiculous, but it was so powerful that I brought this coal into life from nothing. And that really connected me at a deeper level. That whole time spent, in the woods, just learning skills. I don't do it enough, and I wish I did, but did it more. But it's a very different way of connecting to the earth than taking a hike, especially in the American way of let's get 7 miles between here and there in 2 hours and take a water break here and take a picture here and then it's over. And, they joked when I was learning skills that you'll never be able to walk through the woods again in the same way and probably not at the same speed. And now it's true. It's like I'll stop and I'll look at the plan and I'll forage a little something and keep on going. And my wife will be rolling her eyes the whole time because, she's wants to go 3 times faster than me. But so there's a real kind of beauty in finding different ways to relate to the earth. That doesn't have to be about achieving something or getting to something as much as just, connecting in the moment. It's almost meditative in its own way.
And arguably, that kind of philosophy, if everyone overnight could adopt that mentality, a lot of the world's problems would be healed. If everyone did it more, we wouldn't need the monks in the world or the people who are forced to go to extremes, like the self-immolating monks, who had to raise attention to the desperate inequalities and travesties. Yeah. If everyone did a little bit more. That's a lovely message to end on.
The immolating part, or the little more? No. I think it takes a lot more, though, right? That's the thing. I mean, the data. We've waited so long. If we had listened to Dana Meadows in the '70s when she said the limits to growth, and Jimmy Carter's solar panels stayed on the roof, and we had gone in a solar direction then, when we had only 3 or 4 billion people on the planet, and we hadn't really destroyed so much of Earth's capital, or not even capital, the Earth, to not economize it. That would have been a different scenario. But there's going to be a growing pains period now, or a degrowing pains that. So again, I mean, the meditation part is accepting the limits that are coming and not getting mad about it and not fighting. I mean, Yellow Vest kind of rebellion is a perfect example, where all these people in France are fighting over increasing gas prices. But that's a dream for me. I'd love increased gas prices in the United States, right? I mean, if they could double over a period of time that didn't cause a coup, that's a key way of getting us back out of our cars and onto bicycles and walking again, and changing how we design our communities. But in truth, it's a big challenge. So we do have to do a lot more, not a little more. And in part, the Gaian community for me is a way to force myself, in a sense, and hopefully others, not force, but encourage myself to hold myself to a higher level of commitment and changes and practices.
So where can people find out more about Gaianism?
Gaianism.org is probably the easiest way. We have a weekly newsletter and a couple of events each month to connect to the community, and there's opportunities to connect more if you live in New Orleans or Connecticut or Honolulu. We do have a few local groups. Hopefully over time those will grow, but in the short term, the best way is on Gaianism.org, and connecting there.
Excellent. My final question for you then is, who would you like to platform? You've come up with quite a few names throughout, but just in case there's anybody else.
Well, certainly, Lewis is one, and Katharine Hayhoe is another. Another one I thought of, because I did listen to some of your podcasts and knew you'd ask this question. David Orr is another, kind of a father of environmentalism, and has really worked in the recent years to kind of help save American democracy, as a kind of a element of saving the earth. And so he would be, I think, an interesting guest as well.
Brilliant. Eric, thank you so much for making time for me today and for introducing Gaianism to my audience. I really appreciate it. It's really interesting. I have huge amounts of faith in it. I will be subscribing to the newsletter. And hopefully, this is one part of the bigger puzzle of solutions that is going to be very complex and that we all need.
Thank you, Rachel. And I really appreciate you inviting me on. And you're always welcome to join some of our book conversations or our monthly conversations. I'd love to see you there.
I'll be there. Thank you, Eric. If you want to learn more about Gaianism, I've put links to it all in the description box below. Remember to subscribe to this channel and share this episode if you enjoyed it. If you loved it, support Planet Critical on Patreon. A huge thank you to the Planet Critical supporters. This work just wouldn't be possible without you. All right. Thank you all for listening. See you next week.